In a beautiful, happy, and eventful evening, a very important event took place, where in that hall everyone was talking, happy, and the smile was never missing from their lips. On that spectacular and extraordinary evening, all the nobles were to meet in that hall where everyone was happy and fulfilled. At that event, guests were surprised by the presence of a lady in a green dress, holding a fan in her hand and holding it towards her face. After a few words exchanged between a young boy and a young woman, this lady named Cruella appeared in front of them. They were happy to see her. They asked her if there was a problem because she turned her head towards the door. When one day there was a loud noise in that hall, people were scared and they were asking each other if they heard that strange sound. After all this, a young lady with a spectacular coat and blonde hair appeared. That girl, after she entered the hall and everyone was scared and didn't understand what was going on, exclaimed that it looked like she had a rat in her head. At one point, there was a loud crack of lightning from which fire and smoke began to come out. The girl who was sitting in front of the noble tutors started shouting at the girl who entered the hall and spoiled the event. Her name was Kaya. Suddenly, a lady came to her and told her that the door had been broken by someone. Astonished, these two young people couldn't imagine who came in front of them. They didn't have their words with them. They didn't understand what was really happening there. Their eyes couldn't perceive all the things that were happening at that moment. This green-eyed woman came closer and closer to them. Apparently, the girl and that boy who organized the event still remembered her name was Robellia. She was struck that she still remembered her name. After a long time in which many beautiful and not-so-beautiful events took place, the story took a turn where in that place reigns a vengeful villain. On a simple day without many events, Leah appears in front of Andrew. He is scared and doesn't understand what is going on and where she got there. Leah, being pleased and with a smile on her lips, she approached Andrew, glad to see him call her with some nice words like darling husband and so on. Andrew couldn't leave everything and stay out there and invited her inside to his palace where she was with a lady. He asked her if she was okay and that everything was fine. He understood that she was comfortable and that she had made herself comfortable with that lady sitting next to her next to the bed. After an exchanged dialogue between these two, a girl appears and asks her in a nice but sarcastic way what she is talking about. That girl who walked in on them tells Andrew in a nasty, crusty-faced voice that this is Margaret's wife, Elle Daisy. Outside, it was getting dark. Suddenly, a girl was wondering and was curious what it would be like and how it would feel to push someone off a cliff. Someone heard her and started scolding her in a fierce voice to keep her mouth shut and not dare to talk and behave so ugly in that place where they were. The lady who spoke to Margaret was convinced that she was telling the truth and that she was right. A shopkeeper was increasingly daring to step on the spot where they were at that moment. After a moment's inattention, Margaret appears next to her mother-in-law and happily and contentedly tells her that she didn't see her as she had been standing outside. They embraced, and the mother-in-law told her that she saw her at ease and that she felt good even after having rejected her daughter. She was scared and didn't understand what was going on, and asked her with a trembling voice what was going on and what she told her that she didn't understand the purpose of this word she had just spoken. After some time, the story took a major turn, which its purpose was to give all the scoundrels what they really deserved, because it was just the right time. That prince came out, and indignant at all that was going on, exclaimed his grief, and said in an arrogant way that enough of such insolence between all the people talking amongst themselves. He approached that perfect, unassuming girl and couldn't understand how she could look like that and dare to look so tired and sad and lonely, being very outraged as to why there is so much disrespect for his love. The girl in question felt extremely proud to have the Emperor Pranel von Diamas Tygen by her side and was extremely happy to have such a caring and protective person by her side. When out of a deserted silence, more pearls began to appear between them, and they didn't understand what was going on at that moment. People looked and were shocked about Her Majesty's love. Those girls were so envious of that girl that they made her nothing, and in front of them was a simple girl who didn't have anything beautiful. At one point, unexpectedly, another boy appears in front of them, and not understanding what this is all about and what is going on there between the two of them, the boy who was sitting with that girl told him that it was just a simple confusion, and asked his permission to search the young lady more officially. He, being a gentleman, took her by the hand and introduced her as a lady who holds his heart, and that she is the destiny he has long tried to find. She is the girl who is destined to become his future empress. The young lady came to her side very happy and fulfilled. She told her in a very pleasant voice that she had a great pleasure to meet Robellia Eland Gracie. Robellia being extremely proud of herself that people take great pleasure when they meet her, which inspires an extremely high self-belief. The story begins to take a slightly different turn. After 5 years, the story continues in a cottage that was remote from the edge of the Tygen Empire. He already has a child, of whom he is extremely proud as he started to say the word Dada and was slowly starting to walk on his little legs. Life for him was a very beautiful one with his baby. He was happy. They went to wake up his mother, and when the child started to say the word mother, he was very happy to say these 2 very important names. Mommy was already awake and looking at them with beautiful and loving eyes that she has such a beautiful husband and such a cute and sweet baby who was smiling and full of life. His wife was very proud and was extremely happy to have a very caring husband who really loved her with all his heart and was overjoyed for their daughter whom they loved with all their heart. The happiness seemed to be one that was unbounded and full of pure love for each other and for their baby whom they loved to no end. The story even began to be a particularly beautiful one and one not borrowed from anyone who had seeded each other. This story was an extremely special and colorful one until everything started to take a turn and the charm started to fade because of the fate that revealed its really cruel drama. The mother of this beautiful newborn baby went out for a walk with her friend, who asked her to hold this cute and sweet little girl and warned her to take good care of Delphina as she held her, so as not to spoil her sleep. This girl confirmed that Delphina would be in the best of hands. Husband would come back for another 3 days because he always travels a lot to work and support the family, which is actually very hard for him. Robellia merrily confirmed to him that she felt very guilty about leaving her husband to do his best to provide for the family, but thought she would try to get away somewhere for a few days. She very much hopes that after all this, they will find time to relax together to make up for all the time they have been away from each other. After a brief dialogue between the two, Robellia asked her friend to stay with her baby because she had to go to the village fair to meet a friend, but she couldn't help but say goodbye to her lovely baby named Delphina and whispered that they would see each other again soon. Leaving for the village, Robellia met an old friend of hers. They were very happy to meet each other. Robellia, out of politeness, asked him if he had waited for her long. She answered that she had not, because she had soon come there too. They met because Robellia was very keen to get a job, and she thanked her friend for giving her this opportunity to work. The thing she was supposed to do was to serve at the Marquis of Hamilton's estate. She confirmed that the pay would be generous because the wedding would be a grand one. That there was a lack of workers when people were getting a generous salary. She was very scared that there was a lack of workers, which made her feel insecure. Being brave about this shortage of workers, she offered this question to a co-worker, who replied that she is not a nun and does not know the answer to the question, as she has only worked in the kitchen for a temporary period. She in turn asked her where her husband was working at the time. After that girl asked Robellia, among others, where her husband was working at the time they met, Robellia replied that she was not very sure, but she knew something he once mentioned, that he was working for a noble family in the south, and she was very surprised and replied that the estate where they were planning to go to work was also approximately in the southern region. Catching others, they began to take her at a walk. Walking, the girl Robellia met said to him in a disbelieving voice. If he didn't think it was a bit strange, Robellia didn't understand what it was all about and asked her what the strange was. She also granted him a question that if he still knew how her husband suddenly appeared injured 3 years ago, this information was a must, as he might fight demons, and only those skilled in this area and in wielding the noble sword usually have a chance to fight and win against them. Appeared a boy with silver hair, dressed in a beautiful white suit. He asked if the hair of the person they were talking about was silver. He also said that only someone from a distinguished house like the Marquis of Hamilton would usually have such smooth features. The girl Rubelina was next to told her in a pleasant and tame voice that she has some features that are unique. Rubelan was surprised and asked her what those features are. She replied that her eyes are quite unique. Hearing that, she couldn't realize that it was really like that. She confirmed that she really does have very beautiful and distinctive eyes compared to the rest. She also told him that her eyes are like jewels and are quite captivating. He also asked her if there might be a trace of celestial guardians from her lineage. Rubelan, being very excited and pleasantly surprised, told her to stop as she felt ashamed receiving such beautiful compliments. Her friend somehow tried to support her and encouraged her to trust her husband because that's something really wonderful, but urged her to be a little more cautious. She also told her that as far as she knew, there were not many noble families who required such extensive and frequent work unless they were maintaining 2 households, and said in a placid voice that this unfortunately cannot be, but she knows very well that her husband really loves her very much. When suddenly her very surprised friend pretended not to hear anything and asked her what she said and to repeat it again. But Rubelina confirmed that there was nothing already and that everything was fine and beautiful and started smiling in front of her. Her friend started smiling and looking at her and said that she had some resemblance anyway and pointed to her face where he was smiling very pleasantly at her. Rubelin looked at her, was a little stressed. Then this friend of hers tells her that for the future Marquis of Hamilton, she thought, of course she is much nicer. Rubelin started crying and feeling very silly, telling her in a sad and discouraged voice that she shouldn't say such a thing, but her friend kept smiling. The girl felt pleased and accomplished to annoy Rubelin. This even confirmed to her that he liked to tease her, but after this she told him to look at a point. Rubelin didn't understand what was really going on. Then she looked into the sky and was shocked by what she saw. Her eyes were pleasantly surprised to see something like that in order to really get to the Mosi, they would both have to go through the tunnel named Mana. Rubelin asked her if this was the first time she had entered that Mana tunnel. The young lady took a talisman out of her pocket and held it up to show Rubelina. The talisman looked kind of shitty, but that didn't matter, and informed her that without that talisman she had in her hand, it wouldn't have been possible to get through, and that this whole trip would have taken a whole week. That talisman she had in her hand was only accessible to authorized people. In fact, only Hamilton's house distributes such tokens to their servants, who took care to keep everything nice and clean. Rubelin, being shocked by all that had happened, asked her if she wasn't a tearaway. Rubelin, being sure, asked her if it really is in fact an emblem of their house, and merrily is derived from it. Her face, knowing that Andrew had come those, but after a few seconds she started thinking about something, which made her feel a little unsure of everything that had happened. Rubelin felt a certain fear and a feeling that could not calm her, and her friend confirmed that there was the entrance to a new horizon that Rubelin was not yet ready to see. Everything began to be blue and catch a color. The door was a huge one. Her friend, smiling at her, called her there in that paradise where everything was beautiful and unspeakable things were happening. If she hadn't grabbed her hand and taken her with her into that tunnel named Mana, everything wouldn't have been so beautiful and absolutely nothing would have happened. Once she walked through that door, Rubelin couldn't believe how long she waited for her husband to come home to her and be there for her when she was exhausted to the ground. She couldn't believe that she did that, specifically to meet her husband. When suddenly her husband appeared from a very bright light, Rubelin, when she saw him, couldn't believe what was happening and suddenly ran to him, taking him in her arms to feel him beside her and to be as close to her heart as possible because she had missed him for a long time and needed his presence beside her. He looked at her and couldn't believe that she was with him because he was very fond of her and couldn't spend his life without her. After this village of shock from both of them, Andrew asked her in a placid voice if his fate would really remain the same. Robellia was reminded of several moments from their wedding when they were both happy and everyone was congratulating the beautiful and lovely couple. It was a moment Robellia was imagining. When she suddenly turned back to her friend to whom she had left her daughter, Delphia started crying with joy when she saw her mother and started shouting at the top of her lungs for her to come to her side faster. And her daughter, she asked why she had returned so quickly. Delphina couldn't wait to get into her mother's hands and began to squirm and scream at the top of her lungs. Robellia took Delphia in her arms and was extremely happy to see her daughter, who was missing her very much. She was leaning on her mother, being very fulfilled and full of life when she saw her mother next to her and being able to hold her and receive the attention of a responsible and caring mother. She took Delphia in her arms and started crying because she missed her daughter so much and felt extremely guilty for leaving her alone with her friend for so long while she was away. They sat down on the doorstep near the front door and started crying, and Robellia didn't know what to do next. She didn't know what was already waiting for her, and she had no idea what to do at that moment, and she felt extremely insecure about it. After all this, the story continues again in the place where a villainess of a person who is truly vengeful reigns. Robellia's husband has returned. Andrew glad, smiling that he is finally back. He was curious how many things have changed in all the time he has been gone so long. Andrew came into the house happy and fulfilled with some packages that were pretty loud. They were packages he had picked up from the thing where he worked for a long time. The ones he brought were so exquisite and beautiful that he just couldn't stop thinking about his wife and Marilee, and brought home some of the goodies he had at his work. Robellia was a little cold and wished he could be warmed at least with something sweet. Andrew was overjoyed that he had managed to bring home a couple of grannies to sweeten up his family. He asked his wife if they didn't look really delicious. She gave him a positive answer that they did look delicious and had a great structure. They all looked lovely, but Leah was a little sad. This one showed her something she did at the Marquis estate, she being a little unsure of herself, and so asks him with a placid voice, and was extremely brave, what exactly he is doing there at the noble house where he works. He was a little surprised by what she wanted to know. She also asked her why he was away from home for so many days. He was a little saddened when he saw Leah offer him such a question, but replied that it was the wedding of the nobles he serves and serves him. Andrew, being a little worried about all this happening, asks Leah if everything is all right and if she is all right. She didn't give him an answer, but he could see and feel that things weren't positive and that something had happened. He insisted on asking her again what had happened all this time he had been away. She started crying and replied that no, everything is fine except that he will marry another woman. His mood disappeared instantly, but he told her that he had to leave tomorrow again. But he really wished he could spend his days with her where he could relax and rest next to her. But he had something urgent to do, and he couldn't postpone all the plans. But he really wished he could do that. She agreed to it because she understood his problems. Andrew walked up to Leah and touched her hair. She startled and pulled away. They shot each other beautiful, mournful looks. Leah was looking at him, and Andrew could tell something had happened to her. But he wanted to make sure Robellia was okay, and asked her again if she was sure everything was okay as she had said. Leah replied that yes, everything was fine, but she was more concerned about him. After which he came up with the idea of putting them both to bed to sleep, as she knew he was exhausted and tired. Andrew thanked her for understanding that he was tired and came up with the idea of sharing the bed that night they were there. He missed falling asleep because of the perfume she was wearing. Leah replied with a sad that she agreed. Once they were in bed, Andrew kissed Robellia, hugged her, and thought about what had happened to his wife, Leah. And Leah sat with her eyes open, being very distraught and not knowing how to arrange her thoughts in her head. Andrew put his head close to Leah and whispered in her ear that he loved her and really cared about her. Leah, being extremely unhappy and perplexed, she told him in her insecurity that she loved him too, but she was not at all sure of herself, which made Andrew feel bad that he didn't understand what was going on. It was morning. The birds were chirping outside. The sun was glistening in the sky. The trees were green and beautiful. Everything looked beautiful and splendid. Andrew had to leave. She stayed good with Leah and told her they would see each other soon. Leah seemed to be a little better, but still wasn't sure of herself. Eventually, Andrew left and they said goodbye. She told him to take care of himself and what he was doing. But still, Leah was a little sad about everything going on between the two of them. She closed the creaking door and went about her business. She turned around and left and remembered that she had some preparation to do, but she still remained sad and lacking the mood and the will to do something in her life. After all this, her friend came to her and Leah had an idea, which meant checking something out before Andrew went back home. Her friend didn't understand what she meant. Her friend was a bit shocked and didn't understand what was going on in Robellia's head. She didn't understand why everything was happening so suddenly. Robellia apologizes to Delphia for that sudden request that Leah had just made. Her friend was somehow trying to find out from Robellia what was really going on, but Robellia said it was hard to explain in detail, but asked her nicely if she could stay and look after me, really, for just one day. Robellia told her that her daughter had just fallen asleep and surely wouldn't be waking up anytime soon, so she shouldn't worry about it. Concerned about what she wanted to do, and asked her if she was getting into something that was dangerous for her. She also told her not to worry about Merrily, but warned her to be careful what she does where she plans to go. The placid, thin voice thanked her and warned her that she would be back soon and that she was not gone for very long. Where that mysterious tunnel named Mana was, and said that if that one was lying to her, then whatever she had there would surely no longer control her, and she kept going forward. She realized that she had to take things into her own hands and take charge of what she was doing. Suddenly, she began to blunder and feel a little hoarse. Robellia was so convinced that she was very sure that she alone could really find the truth that was hiding. She had huge emotions. She kept swallowing the words she had in her head to have a little clearer mind and no negative thoughts. When she got to the entrance, she confirmed that this was the only tunnel named Mana that had an entrance to the Marquis's estate. She was extremely happy that she could do her best to borrow that mysterious talisman that could get you into that Mana tunnel. The person in front of her nodded that it was correct what she said and that she was very right. For her, what she was doing there was an extremely big and sufficient and unique opportunity. She put her eye on the viewfinder and saw what was really going on in that tunnel and began to be shocked by all that was happening. Robellia, very convinced and indignant, but also unsure of herself, has decided that even if her marriage is not a good one and turns out to be a bad one, she must protect Merrily. She dressed herself in a maid's outfit so she could walk around that house. She was very convinced that in that outfit, no one would look at her twice, and it would be very easy for her to move around the house so that no one would notice her, and no one would realize that she was a suspicious person. For her, the most important thing that could happen was to see Andrew with her own eyes. After she realized that, she started crying so hard not to be caught by anyone around. Robellia hoped very much and wanted very much to find Andrew sooner, so as not to lose this chance, she had to be there in that palace. When all of a sudden she hears a voice telling her that it is for real, and immediately she felt that the voice was a familiar one. She was extremely convinced herself that the voice she heard and thought she knew was really her husband Andrew's voice. She knocked on the door where she really thought Andrew was. When she opened the door, immediately apologized to those inside and closed the door. Yet she was sure that Andrew was in there, which was actually a true thing. Robellia was very worried about all this happening and stood by the door and listened to everything they were talking about in that room. Robellia had an idea to open the door. She didn't know exactly what to do because she was still not very sure of herself, but she finally opened the door. When a lady comes out with a very evil look and very indignant, she didn't understand what was going on and why she was bothered. Her name was Cruella de Hamilton, the Dowager Marchioness. This one came out and didn't understand why Robellia had called her just to say a simple yes. She came out indignant and angry and even thought Robellia was a maid, and was very upset and didn't understand what was going on with the maid training in those days. When suddenly, being very angry, she slaps Robellia, still thinking she is a servant when things were not like that at all. That woman didn't understand how dare this maid speak before she drowned in front of her. Robellia didn't understand what was really going on and asked if she was hit just because she didn't drown in front of this lady. Suddenly, someone appeared there and apologized that from that lady dressed in a red coat as the so-called Robellia maid, she was not trained how to behave, and that she would do her best to train her properly and not make this fatal mistake any faster. She did not agree with what the girl said and apologized to her. Indignantly, she said that she alone would teach her how to behave properly. She gave the order and started shouting in a loud voice to be grabbed and taken to a special room. As soon as she said that, the women grabbed her and took her away. Robellia didn't understand what was going on at all. She asked those women to wait a little while to understand what was really going on, but they were too angry to give her a hard time and kept walking her up. Leah was shocked by everything that had happened. She prayed with all her heart that everyone would leave her alone and not take her anywhere. Suddenly, she started to shout insistently the name of her boyfriend, Andrew. She was taken to a deserted room where there was only one woman dressed in an evil dress, and nothing even glanced at whoever entered her evil, shabby room filled with barrels and wooden boxes. Poor Robellia was trembling with fear. She felt extremely tired and confused and didn't understand what was going on there at all, and wondered to herself what was going on, but couldn't find a concrete answer to this question. That woman had a long, thick rope in one hand and with an evil voice confirmed that she would do well and that the time had come for this innocent little girl to really learn her place. It began to smile sarcastically and evilly and told her what a delightful toy she was, and it seemed like it had been a while. Robellia finally had something to say in her defense, but it wasn't really heard. But still, she kept saying that if she didn't, she would be killed before she got back to Merrily. She started yelling at her, thinking that somehow this would help her. This woman was very indignant. She talked about the fact that only she and Marquis has a power and berated her for shutting her mouth alone, that it would make her shut up in another, easier and more painful way. The lady asked her that if the talk the two of them had had there a little earlier was not enough, and not to dare to introduce and mention her son's name to her, and warned her that she would suffer much for it. Robellia, being very scared and frightened of everything that was going on at that moment, said that between her and Marquis there was a child, and she didn't want her to get hurt and have a very messed up state that would affect her mentally and emotionally. When this woman heard what Robellia said, she was shocked and amazed by everything that was going on. She didn't understand what was going on and what the child she said about. She didn't understand anything and was shocked about this information. This woman began to reproach her that it could not possibly be about a child because her son had been married for a very short time, and that she did not understand what child she was talking about and why such a maid would have this courage and dare to tell these lies in front of her. Robellia told her very convincingly that it was not a lie and that this happened 3 years ago. Their conversation continued, and Robellia told him about Marquis lying alone in a pool of blood. Robellia also said that in their care they had grown deeper, and so they gave birth to a baby. Robellia picked him up and carried him to a bed because she felt extremely sick, and then in those moments the child was already conceived, and she prayed very nicely that that lady would believe her, because she was not telling lies and even telling the truth as it was. This, at that moment when Marquis was feeling extremely ill, she was beside him to support him and grabbed his hand and encouraged him that everything would be all right and stopped the blood from his open wounds. That queen sat and thought and asked Robellia again if everything she had told happened 3 years ago because she remembered something, but she still wasn't sure if what Leah said was really true. The Tuesday woman claimed it to be true because she remembered how her son disappeared for a few days. During those days, she claimed he went off to hunt demons, but in fact, this was not a true one. She also said that when he came back home, he didn't seem hurt at all and was in impeccable condition, and there's no way anyone would believe he was hurt and didn't understand exactly what she was talking about, but asked her to go ahead and say what actually happened. Marquise's mother approached Robellia and began to caress her and look at her with a tender, beautiful gaze and told her that it was imperative that she tell the whole truth because all the circumstances came together in that case. She tried to reassure her and called her some nice words. She also asked her if it was really true that she had given birth to her son's children and that she was really their biological mother. And if she really wasn't lying to her face, she really wanted to know what the truth was. Robellia confirmed that it is true that she is the mother of the child, and also told him that the name of this little girl is Merrily, and this name was given to her by Marquis himself. Robellia started crying, but at the same time she got a dose of confidence and felt a little freer as she told him what the truth actually was. Marquis's mother called a lady named Chelsea and offered to check if Robellia was telling the truth and not trying to pull some kind of trick. Chelsea confirmed that she is willing to do anything to verify if what Robellia said is true. She ordered Chelsea to bring Endymion and Margaret there to check if everything was as Leah had said. Chelsea was a little shocked and startled when she heard this information. She couldn't believe she really wanted to call Margaret and asked her again if she really wanted to call her. That woman who kept Robellia close to her confirmed that it was necessary and felt the need to call Margaret, as she might need to address the possibility that she was not a concubine of his, and it was natural to call Margaret. Robellia, when she heard about the concubine, she was shocked and couldn't believe what he said. Robellia was very shocked and couldn't explain how her husband could marry another woman and that it wasn't bad enough, but she couldn't believe how she could take the place of a mere concubine. She was so disappointed that she dropped her hand and was enclosed. She felt a little guilty because she felt that the real betrayal was on Andrew's part, because he is married to her while he was courting another girl in secret and not telling anyone and keeping it all hidden inside. Marquis's mother took one look at this girl and was a little disappointed, but still said she trusted him. Robellia, sitting down on the ground, sad and disappointed, said that he still must have had his reasons for why he lied, and that he would definitely explain himself and apologize for cheating on Robellia. When suddenly more footsteps began to sound, and outside the door was Andrew. At one point, Andrew walks into that spooky room and sees Robellia sitting sad and disappointed on the floor, powerless and without a will to live. When he sees this, he starts screaming at her as he just couldn't believe his eyes. Robellia. When she hears someone say her name, she looks back and sees a startled Andrew running towards her. Robellia couldn't believe she saw him. She was shocked by everything that had happened. He looked at her and started smiling, and couldn't imagine seeing Robellia there. He grabbed his hand on his beard and looked at her and couldn't understand what Robellia was doing in that huge, strange room. Andrew, being extremely happy to see Robellia again, started calling her his love, encouraging her with warm and sweet words. He was extremely happy and fulfilled to have the chance to see her. They hugged and looked at each other with very happy eyes. Andrew asked her if she had flinched, and that he hadn't meant to make Robellia so surprised. Robellia couldn't believe she was seeing him and began to shiver with joy and how happy she felt. Andrew came over to her to support her and hug her, telling her that there was no need for such formality and that he was her husband after all, and no one should bother them about it. When he uttered the word, her husband, everyone was shocked and couldn't believe it was true. Marchioness of Hamilton. Margaret L. Daisy was shocked and did not understand if it was really true what the maid Robellia said, and if it was really true that there was a child. Margaret couldn't believe it and told Andrew that if he realized that they had been married less than a week, but were already married, she couldn't explain it. Andrew replied that he could explain everything if he had to. Andrew began to explain to everyone in the room that first and foremost, Robellia really is his wife, and that he feels very comfortable with her and doesn't miss anything, and that the two of them have been married for 3 years now. Then he started telling them that Robellia was the person who took care of him, supported him at all times. He could rely on Robellia to help him at any time, and that she really saved his life. His mother sat and looked at him and didn't believe that such a thing could be possible. Andrew began to open up to his mother and tell her that he would appreciate it very much if she would understand him, because he has many responsibilities to protect the child he has and his wife, whom he loves dearly, named Robellia. He also claimed that he loves his wife as much as he loves his mother. Andrew was extremely pleased that he was able to put an end to it all and wondered with a smile on his mouth how it would be possible for him to choose one of them without either of them getting upset and feeling bad. Margaret, when she heard what he said to her, started shouting at him and being very indignant about all the words he said, and also reproached him for not being able to say another more serious reason. Andrew tried to calm her down and told her that at that moment there was really no reason to apologize. Robellia felt extremely disappointed when she heard all this talk. She knew Andrew had no one. It turned out he actually had a mistress. She was extremely disappointed in him and couldn't believe what was happening. Robellia, being extremely disappointed with all that had happened, wanted very much to drive him out of her mind and forget everything that had happened in those moments, and wanted everything to be fine and beautiful, as it had been before. The story again continues at the place where the reign of the vindictive scoundrel, who didn't know what he wanted from everyone and behaved extremely ugly to everyone, has been reigning for a very long time. However, his wife was extremely disappointed in him because she thought he was a kind and respectful person, kind and kind-hearted like no other, but in fact he is a scoundrel and without common sense and a crazy person. Robellia had once again convinced herself that she was a disgusting person for not knowing how to behave properly with people, and that in fact his warmth was not reserved just to offer to her alone, but in fact was an affectionate discernment to all. Yet Robellia still couldn't realize that she had been deceived by him and felt extremely offended and used. Robellia started crying her heart out and convinced herself that she could not continue her life with such an imbecile who cheated on her and took advantage of her kindness and simplicity. Andrew's mother was also a bit shocked, as she didn't expect such arguments between the lovers and tried to make a decision for Andrew that would help him more, but she was stopped by her son. They understood that Endymion should leave where they all were, but he didn't understand why. However, he answered them that there are things to be concluded between the girls and that they shouldn't listen to everyone. And among other things, they understood that the child should be brought there to conclude everything and that there should be peace for all. Andrew sat and thought and understood that Robellia is right and that his bloodline cannot linger there. More exactly, Phyta cannot leave her there and that it is necessary to bring her there to them. He also argued that it is very fair and let her go and share their discussions and that he will leave first of all. Andrew's mother was still in an indescribable state and couldn't realize all the things that were happening. Her mood was not so good anymore, but next to her came the woman who works at her house with a cup that was filled with a mysterious liquid solution. She approached Robellia and apologized for everything that had happened. She took a few drops of the mystery solution and touched her cheeks and explained that if she knew she had been involved with her son, he certainly wouldn't have behaved so badly to her, and apologized again for her bad behavior. Robellia was left shocked. She didn't know what to say or how to behave. Margaret approached Robellia looking at her furiously, asked if she could lead her to where her child was, as she very much wanted to see her grandchild with her own eyes, and proposed to discuss more only after she brought the child to where they were. Robellia flinched when she heard the talk about her baby start. Andrew's mother told her that Robellia would be staying there and that it would be much better to bring the baby there sooner rather than later, because that was the only way he would feel safe there. His mother assured her and promised her that where she proposed to stay with her and her child, it would be much better, and that she and her child would not miss anything, and that it would be a much better place to raise her child than where she had been all this time. She also said that she promised her support so that she could become part of their family and that she would feel safer that way, then asked her if she would forgive her rudeness and if she would accept her into the family. Robellia was simply shocked by everything that had happened and started crying and felt extremely exhausted by everything that had happened, and finally accepted that they would all become a family. They touched their palms, and Andrew's mother's hands were very warm. Robellia asked if this was what a mother's hands felt like because she had not experienced such parental warmth. Finally, their little girl named Marilee appeared. Robellia was extremely excited and happy to see her there beside her. Also, Andrew's mother still couldn't imagine that Marilee is their daughter and that Robellia is the mother of this cute little girl. Andrew's mother has ordered that where she lives, he will have absolutely everything he wants, starting with food, sweets of all kinds, and parental warmth. Marilee was extremely excited when she saw all the goodies on the table. Her eyes were watering for strawberry shortcake. Robellia reached for a cookie that Merrily had set her eyes on and gave it to her to nibble on, because this little girl couldn't take her eyes off those goodies that sat there on the table winking at her. That woman, Andrew's mother, asked her, very convinced that most likely where she was at that moment, she would grow up much better and happier than in a mountain cabin where it was extremely cold. Merrily was extremely excited about everything that was happening at that moment. Robellia said that where they are in that palace, Merrily's life will be extremely wonderful and full of interesting activities, and he will certainly not miss anything, because it offers him absolutely everything, and he will have no doubts about it. Andrew's wife was very excited and felt very happy that Merrily and she will have a life of luxury, and that the offer Andrew's mother proposed is a very advantageous one on them. She thanked the ladies for opening up an extremely advantageous path for her and thanks her from the bottom of her heart. This lady understood that she had made a wise and correct decision to propose to Robellia to take her child with her from a mountain hut for a more advantageous and profitable way of living for all. She felt extremely excited about this choice she had made. That lady had a pleasure to look at Robellia, and she appreciated her more and more and began to appreciate her more and more. Andrew's nanny realized that whatever she proposed was really the right decision, and the fact that Robellia accepted is proof that she really does care about Merrily and her husband. After all of this, she embraced her and felt very happy. Robellia still couldn't realize what a good and advantageous offer she had received from that lady and didn't know how to thank her. But she was indeed very grateful and glad that she had thought of her. After all this happened, Robellia met some men dressed in black and with their hair covered, who were walking behind her in a direct line that Robellia was leading. They didn't understand why they were walking so far and, being so puzzled, asked her if they were far from where Robellia wanted to bring them. Robellia apologized to them and told them that the house where she was staying was a little more slummy than the rest, and asked them if it was not hard for them and if they were not tired. Finally, after such a long journey, they reached her house. Once she got there on the spot, Robellia instantly missed that house, and automatically in her head came more memories that she once had there. Once he got to that house, which was situated in a very remote location from society, where in front of the house was a small pond, the trees were big. Those people asked her if that lady was in that house. As soon as he reached the door, he burst to open it, but first Robellia cautioned them that he was a little humble, but asked them to be comfortable. Once they were inside the house, Robellia started calling out to Delphia, merrily, that she had arrived home, but no one gave an answer. Once inside the house, she saw her little girl sitting down on the floor playing with some of her toys and asked in a frightened voice where Delphia was. Everything started to tilt towards something negative. Merrily was frightened and said the word mother in a placid voice. Merrily was extremely happy to see his mother Robellia again, and she was very sad and stressed, but that didn't stop Merrily from smiling and being extremely happy to see his mother. When suddenly Andrew's mother appears out of nowhere with a scary look and full of negative emotions. She very indignantly said that silver hair so shiny and that this child is a very picky one. Robellia fell to the ground when she saw what was happening to her again. She couldn't believe that again that lady was being so mean to her. She didn't understand why Andrew's mother was so strident and wished Robellia and Merrily ill. Sitting down, Robellia was extremely disappointed and scared by all that had happened. She couldn't believe what was happening at that moment. She thought it was all a dream. When suddenly a sharp and scary sword appeared near her head, she didn't understand what was happening. Merrily was very puzzled. He was extremely frightened and understood almost nothing, but all he understood was that everything that was happening at that moment was really strange, and he was worried about Robellia's mother. That lady picked Merrily up in her arms and was looking closely at her and analyzing her, and suddenly started smiling a very evil smile, and stated that she was extremely sure that she was born from the seed of her son named Andrew. She was becoming more and more shrill. Her eyes seemed to be of a very evil demon who wishes harm to all the people around, and suddenly she said that a confirmation is a mutually beneficial one, and asked if these words she had put were true. Among other things, she suddenly pulls a small, sharp sword out of her pocket and points it at Marilee's body. She warned that innocent little girl not to worry at all, that everything would be fine and dandy. She also said it wouldn't take long, just a few seconds. Robellia, when she saw what that lady wanted to do, she instantly shot up and started screaming at the top of her voice to Andrew's mother that what she was going to do with that little sword. She begged her not to do anything to Marilee. She was worried sick about her daughter. The lady pretended not to hear anything at all and raised her sword up in order to do some harm to Marilee. She told him that everything would be fine and that this pain would not be a long one. On the contrary, it would be a short one and not very painful. Robellia on one side began to scream at her. She couldn't believe what that crazy lady with no pain in her was going to do. Fortunately, Marilee was still showing signs of life. Some nerves still untouched by the sword that had hurt her by that woman who was so shrill and frightening to everyone. Robellia started crying. She had no strength left at all. She felt very exhausted, and she understood that she had lost everything she held most dear on earth, namely her child Marilee. For her life was already meaningless. She realized that she was left with nothing in her life. Marilee started screaming with all the strength she had left from that stabbing from Andrew's mother. Marilee was still showing signs of life. She was very hurt. Robellia was shocked by everything that happened at that moment. She started screaming and crying so loud that she had no more power to do anything. That lady took out a charming charm and warned Robellia to stay still. Robellia was in a state of shock. Tears were everywhere. She couldn't breathe. She started to shout out loud the name of her little girl Marilee. That lady told her that Marilee was really still alive. She approached Marilee and began to tear apart that talisman she had pulled out of a secret, well-hidden place, and said in an evil voice that Marilee was wearing her son Andrew's seed. When Delphia suddenly appeared from the side, she was quite shocked by all that had happened and started shouting out loud with an exclamation that what had happened there in that demon-haunted house. Robellia began to feel a little safer when she saw Delphia next to her. Delphia was in a state of shock when she saw that Marilee was sitting down in a pool of blood and hardly giving any sign of life. She couldn't believe everything she saw in front of her eyes. She was extremely stressed by everything that had happened. When suddenly Robellia sat down exhausted and powerless to do anything more, she said to stop immediately whatever Andrew's mother was doing there with her daughter Marilee. This evil lady started laughing at what Robellia said. She asked her why she was pretending not to know anything and pretending everything was fine. This very prissy and no sense in her told Robellia to look at her that she is just a simple and innocent commoner, and it would be rather insulting to accept a girl from such a poor background as she is, and that she has the audacity to have a child in front of her lawful wife, and further argued that it is really very absurd. Robellia sat down bent over crying, feeling very badgered by everyone, and berated Andrew's mother that she didn't take her son Andrew by force, and that they had come to a common denominator of the two of them being together. Robellia really didn't understand anything anymore. Robellia was already starting to get on his nerves and could no longer accept all the accusations against her, and told him with all her puzzlement that she had not forced him to be with her and that she had not kidnapped him from somewhere and locked him up against his will. She also told him that she is also the one who everyone makes fun of and feels insulted and angry all the time by absolutely everyone. Also, where they were staying in a very infracoastic room was Andrew's other girlfriend, who confessed that he never gave her any explanation or even told her what his other girlfriend's last name was, Robellia, and also talked a lot of nonsense and confessed that he loved them both the same. This girl, specifically Andrew's other girlfriend, was shocked at all the things that were happening in those moments and was praying that they would be spared all that drama that was there in that room and wishing that everything would end nicely. After which, Andrew's mother returns to Robellia and asked her what her point of view is and why she is trying to play the victim all the time, and also told her that some things happen that she still doesn't understand and that this is the consequence of her son Andrew's generous affection. Robellia was left in a state of shock when she heard what nonsense this lady was saying, and she didn't understand why she was saying such things. Andrew's mother had an extremely scary look on her face and was smiling really sarcastically and confessed that due to her credibility, things were quite clear-cut. She also confessed that, as she has said in the past, the child will get the support of her and the rest of the people in the palace who will take care of her. She was holding Merrily in her arms and suddenly started crying intensely and loudly with big drops. Andrew's mother tried to calm her down and stop her crying, after which she told him that from now on, Merrily was theirs for good from all that had happened. Robellia still sat playing on her knees and crying her heart out. And after a silence, she told her that she had no desire to engage with that kind of people anymore. But then she already had nothing more to say. He began to call out to Merrily at the top of his lungs because he wanted her very much to be with her, to feel her in his arms. When suddenly Chelsea tried to come closer to Robellia to support her, the guards raised the sword to her head. Delphina shivered in fear and didn't understand what their intentions were. Suddenly, there was a call for her to be killed. After no more than 10 seconds, Delphina was under the sword of those guards who cared for Andrew's mother. At that moment, everyone was shocked at what had happened in that tense situation. At one point, Delphina fell down without a breath, but as she was stabbed, she tried to utter the word Robellia, but unfortunately, it was not to be. Robellia was shocked by the whole thing. Robellia started to scream out loud. She was crying her eyes out. She was calling out to Delphina with some hope that something mysterious would happen and she would come back to life. But unfortunately, this was not possible. She felt extremely guilty because everything that happened was her fault. She was disappointed and very sad and worried about Delphina's health. Robellia bent down next to Delphina's disembodied body and begged her from the bottom of her heart not to die and to leave her side, offering that she would heal her, just to stay by her side. Robellia tried to do everything possible to bring Delphia back to life and be part of her life. She took out her lucky charm that heals people's wounds and prayed very hard that it would bring Delphia back to life. But something didn't work as it should, and that charm had no effect on Delphina's death. Andrew's mother stood to one side with Merrily and another woman and looked at her with an evil look and told Robellia that enough is enough to use that talisman, and that's why it no longer works. Robellia was very puzzled and didn't understand why this misfortune was happening to her, when suddenly a guard approached her with a long, sharp sword in his hand who surely had some negative intentions towards her. That guard took the sword in his hand and tried to hit Robellia with all his strength. She had a very quick reaction, and she moved to the side and protected herself from that very strong blow from that dubious person. Those two were shocked that Robellia managed to react in time and not be hit very drastically by that guard who was capable of killing any human in the whole world. Robellia began to become extremely angry and annoyed with Andrew's mother and began yelling at her and her guards that if they thought they were capable of killing her so easily, they were surely sorely mistaken. That ruthless lady didn't understand what was going on with Robellia and what she had driven her to do. She was very scared of her intentions and finally understood that Robellia wanted to answer for everything she had done to her. She pulls out from behind her back a magical and spectacular sword of a reddish-brown color that glows extremely bright. Robellia was capable of killing anyone, as she was very much enraptured by everything that had happened throughout her life. The dubious lady was shocked that she had in her hand that magic sword that only her family could have access to, and did not understand how such a simple woman could have access to something as valuable as that sword. Those artifacts were beyond the treasure of that castle, and no one could afford to have such a thing with them. But suddenly it occurred to her that her son had given her that enchanting sword. Margaret, like Andrew's mother, was in a state of intense shock and understood that everything that was happening there was not going to end well, and that Robellia had some bad intentions with that very dangerous sword. After all this, suddenly a very scared and agitated boy jumps up and walks towards Robellia to calm her down and take away the dangerous sword Robellia had. Robellia was very indignant and slashed the man with that sword and did her best to bring her plan that she had in mind to a good end, because she was very fruity on Andrew's mother for hurting him so much. Robellia, however, managed to escape from that shady boy and escaped from all the soldiers who were there to guard the whole situation there, that one started shouting that the soldiers had fallen. She was extremely angry at all of them. Those two, Margaret and Andrew's mother, were frightened by the state of indignation Robellia was in. Margaret was very stressed and asked Robellia what to do, to which she replied not to move an absolute muscle. Robellia approached them and started yelling at Andrew's mother to return merrily to Robellia's hands, and that way no one would get hurt or anything. She wasn't asking for anything more than her own daughter. His mother looked at her and started smiling very evil and told her that merrily, if she is her son's seed, why does she want so much to give him back to her if he will be in good hands with her father anyway? The story continues again at the place where the most wicked person in the world reigns, who wanted to harm all people and wanted to take revenge on everyone for no reason. Yet that heated tension still continued in that house. Talk was heard that if Hamilton blood flows in it, then it is obvious, and in a natural and obvious way, it belongs to her. He told Robellia in a malevolent voice full of negativity that he was lucky that he was so thorough and asked her if she didn't agree with what he said then. Robellia looked at him and was speechless and didn't know what to say. He looked at Robellia and confessed to her with confidence and convinced her to let him clear the air with everyone who had a beef with her, hurting to make her feel a little freer and at least console her with what he could. Towards them were several enraged soldiers. Andrew's mother was with them. He told Robellia that these soldiers were ready to die for Hamilton, and all they needed was a simple magic dagger. There was no need for grand or supernatural gestures. Robellia started to get extremely angry at all those who were heading towards the threshing floor. She asked that boy where they came from, so many, and realized that it was a trouble and that the power of the magic puman was decreasing more and more because there were so many of them. However, in the end, Robellia came to her senses and realized she had all the odds with them, as she was very angry and argued that she had to get over them, as Delphina's death was a truly unjust one, and of course she had the motivation to fight for her daughter merrily as well. That lady, Andrew's mother, was very angry and mad at her and claimed that she still didn't understand the lesson she gave him and started yelling at all her soldiers that why are they all sitting and watching, and demanded he finish her off altogether. They didn't even think twice and confirmed the order given by that evil lady. Those soldiers really were ready to do anything to earn their living, and in a rage they jumped on Robellia with their very large and sharp swords in order to kill her and finally get rid of her. Robellia was extremely angry, but still she had self-confidence and was ready to fight everyone just to defend her daughter and to answer to them for killing Delphina for no particular reason. He started to fight with one soldier who even seemed to be a very experienced one. She didn't have much chance to win because her sword was a very small one and his was an extremely large and sharp one. After a rather skirmish between the two of them, Robellia was still trying somehow to beat the soldier who could fight very well. She was trying to do her best to win, but she understood that the chances were very small, and while fighting, she started to cry. That woman stood to one side and watched as her soldiers all fought against one woman who had never fought in her life. She said that even with the help of that magic sword, it is very hard to fight alone against those numerous soldiers. She also claimed that it will all be over very soon. However, Robellia had no strength left to fight against all those elite soldiers who were very experiment and being devoid of strength. She fell down. She still understood that she had no chance against them, but still somewhere in her soul, she felt that she would be lucky to win them. When suddenly, merrily out of the arms of that evil lady, started crying and screaming at the top of his lungs at his mother, because how small she was. But still, he understood that his mother was not in the best mood when he sat down and cried. Andrew's mother, when she saw Merrily watching his mother struggle and started crying, instantly she glared at her so she couldn't see anything going on there. That lady was trying to calm her down and not make a fuss. Margaret was next to Merrily and tried to reassure her with some very rude words, like she would never see her mother's face again, that she would already be killed by those elite soldiers, and that already the only way to find instant happiness would be just her. Robellia sat down and lay there, crying continuously. She had absolutely no strength left to speak, but finally she realized that the hand charger in the dagger was already exhausted completely. She understood that Marilee would already be out of her hands and started screaming at the top of her lungs. Andrew's mother was extremely happy that those soldiers of hers had won that battle and asked Robellia what made her think that she would be accepted to stand in the way of her son's prosperity and to be thankful and grateful that she had given birth to a child with her son's blood. That lady walked off to the carriage that they had come there to Robellia's house in, extremely happy and fulfilled. She climbed into it and was very excited that Marilee was going to be defined on her hands. And from the back, you could still hear Robellia sitting and crying and still not realizing what had just happened. Andrew's mother told Marilee that everything was fine and that she should close her eyes and get some sleep, because when she wakes up, a new, happier life awaits her. Robellia was already dead tired and powerless. She had no desire for anything. She understood that everything she held dear had lost everything, and she was left with absolutely nothing. She didn't feel like living anymore, because for her life already had no meaning. She lay down on the ground and blinked with difficulty, barely breathing because those soldiers she had fought had left her powerless, and she didn't feel like doing anything anymore, just sitting down next to Delphina's lifeless body. Finally, she got up from the floor and started to realize all that was happening. She had some huge headaches, and all she could think about was Marilee. In her head at that moment was only how to find Marilee as soon as possible, as there was not much time left. Robellia started talking to Delphina and apologizing 1,000 times for everything that happened, and that everything that happened then and the cause of her death was all because of Robellia, and apologizing to her, she promised her that she would be back soon with Marilee and asked her to wait for her until then. However, Robellia went outside with the goal of finding Marilee, but she didn't realize how long she had been unconscious and was very confused. She didn't know if those went very far from the house where Robellia was. She kept thinking about how to find Marilee and realized that the only way to find her is to go to the Hamilton estate, no matter how far it is. Even if it takes her a week or more without the Mana tunnel, she will do her best to get there anyway. Dear friends, and if you want to know what happened next and what happened to Robellia and her baby and their other enemies, be sure to subscribe to the channel and don't forget to click the bell so you don't miss the next part of this manga, and to speed up the release of the next part of the story. Let's get 40,000 views or 5,000 likes under this video.